Hello and welcome back to Learn It from a Layman. I am Carl Christensen, joined by Tim. I can write words, Cox.
I was hoping for something more literary, considering tonight's topic.
Well, that's you. Writing words is your literary masterpiece.
I guess that is pretty literary. I mean, what else is literature than writing words? So, okay,
Exactly. Yeah, we're going to be talking about the basics of literary devices today, which our layman credentials are pretty solid here, but we do have some degree of expertise because I know some people come on here, especially when we have expertise. Tim, what did you used to teach?
English. And I'll tell you, we used a number of literary devices. Sometimes kids would read on a Kindle. Sometimes they would read on, you can pull up books on a laptop. A lot of devices can access literature with it.
No. That is an example of not, sarcasm?
Oh, maybe so. Yeah. What is intentional ineptitude? I don't know if that's a
Well, if it is, then this podcast is rife with it.
Masters. That's right.
Okay. So literary devices are just different devices, tools used in writing in order to either paint a clearer picture, hammer home a specific point, or generally just make writing more appealing. Right, Tim?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the techniques a writer can use to accomplish many purposes. You've mentioned a couple. I think evoking motion would be one, and to do the nebulous work of poetry in English writing, whether that be in prose like non-poetic writing or in poetry itself, but the kind of the artistic and creative turn of writing in English.
Right. And for those of you that are longtime listeners for the podcast, we years ago had my dad on, who was a doctorate in English, and he talked about writing and what good writing is and how to potentially get your writing published. So if that's what you're looking for, go find that podcast, because Tim used to be a high school English teacher and has since been demoted. So
that's right. And yeah, let's be frank. No one's going to outclass your dad in talking about literature and writing.
Yeah. So we can't have my dad on anymore. He passed away, so thus we have to refer you back to that podcast because he shared his wisdom in that podcast. All right, though, Tim, I'm going to list some literary devices. We're going to discuss them, and then maybe at the end we can talk a little bit about why we should use these, how you can start adding these into your writing if you're interested in writing, and if you click on a podcast about literary devices, you're probably interested in writing. Okay, the first one, honestly, it's my least favorite because, well, I hate it.
That's a great way to start.
It's a simile. It just seems so weak. And it also seems like, why do we even need a name for it? Like, it seems entirely unnecessary. So for those of you, maybe we have some middle schoolers in here, honestly, that are just learning about literary devices, don't know what a simile is. A simile is a figure of speech comparing two different things using the word like or as.
Or possibly than.
Okay. It's so specific and it's like describing how to write a sentence. It isn't. Comparison would be like a better literary device name than simile, where you have to use the word like or at. Like, as soon as you have to define a word or two, or maybe even three that you have to use in a device, it's no longer a device. It's like a box.
I didn't know you had harbored this hatred for similes.
Everyone should.
I can feel it coming off of you, kind of like a fog or a burning fire.
Similes are as dumb as a rock.
There you go. We're throwing them out like hot potatoes.
They certainly have their usefulness. I guess my beef is that like they should even either be part of a larger construct, like just comparison, or they shouldn't be named at all, I guess. Like I don't know.
Yeah. Now, to offer a counterpoint, I think because you could say, because similes, teachers, you're always going to teach similes alongside metaphor, which I'm sure we'll be talking about shortly here, but which are both comparisons. But the real difference, you've mentioned the technical difference, which is the use of the word like or as or then. But there's a conceptual difference that is behind the use of those words, and that is a metaphor is full-on figurative, where it's you're saying something that is not literally true in order to create an image or to make that comparison. A simile is kind of just the halfway point. It's speaking something. It's not fully figurative.
Honestly, I think I'd prefer if the definition of a simile were just weak sauce metaphor.
Weak sauce metaphor. Well, I would call it a metaphor that recognizes that it's figurative speech. See, that's the thing. A simile knows what it is. A metaphor doesn't. It's living a delusional life. Similes, they know what's up.
Well, metaphor has become something else, Tim.
Wait, are you leading into a metaphor about metaphors?
No, just the word metaphor, like metamorphosis, like it's changed. You see? Okay. We're moving on from similes. I'm done talking about them. Metaphor.
Yeah.
A metaphor is another comparison. But yeah, I mean, it's just a straight up, this thing is this other thing. It is equating two things that are not the same. For use of Tim is a eagle because he I don't know.
that really hit it home.
Tim, I don't know.
You might say I'm a beacon of light in your dark and dreary world.
I wouldn't say that, which is why it didn't come to mind.
But there you go. There's a metaphor for you, right?
Right.
Your words are a refreshing. Give me a second. A refreshing dessert in the cheap casino buffet of my daily routine. I don't know.
Cheap casino buffet would be how I describe this podcast.
Yeah, and in their defense, I actually like casino buffets.
Everyone should.
Yeah, that's right. I do have to say, the last time I had one, I was a teenage boy, and so it's probably not the most discriminating palate.
Right. Well, I think the thing about the cheap casino buffets that really does strike a chord with the comparison of our podcast to that is that while you're consuming it, you're thinking, this is actually pretty good. And then later on, you can reflect back and be like, that's one of the worst things I've ever heard or eaten.
And why did I go back for that fourth plate?
Yeah, but the price is right, which is also the case.
Yeah, that's right. And just like in a casino, in our podcast, the house always wins.
Okay. Next
I don't
one.
know what that even means. Wait. So no, are we done with metaphors?
That's it. Okay, that's all they needed to know. Tim is an eagle. They'll remember that. They won't know why.
Maybe we can get an endorsement from the Eagles if they're still around. But...
Didn't they lose tonight? I don't know. Anyway, okay. Alliteration. Alliteration, Tim, is Tiny Tim teaches terrible teens?
Wow, that actually cuts me really deep because I coach my daughter's soccer team. And so in a sense, that statement is true.
Well, I was thinking
Nope,
about your day job, Tim.
a day job. Hey, and I'll say our soccer team, we won our last game. So there we go.
But you don't have teenagers, Tim. So
Yeah, that's right.
okay.
But I'll explain alliteration just for
Yeah,
so that's
yeah. Shoot.
a wonderful and hard-hitting example. It's where you make the initial sound of the words in your phrase begin with the same sound. So you're starting with that same sound. It can be done just on a line or even in a phrase, just a few words. You can alliterate, or you can write entire poems. And in fact, English history, old English poetry is full of alliteration. And in fact, before the Renaissance, alliteration was the probably the go-to um, literary device that defined English poetry. After the Renaissance, English poetry started to adopt rhyme. But yeah, go back to the Middle Ages and the old, pre-Middle Ages, Old English. You'll find alliteration. Beowulf, one of the oldest uh, poems in English written in alliteration. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, use alliteration. So that's it. If you want to really be a good, true English poet, use alliteration.
Right. Which you've now lost everyone. Nobody wants that, Tim.
Nobody wants that. Go back and read Beowulf. Gawain and the Green Knight. Good stuff.
I have read a portion of Beowulf, which is more than enough.
Get out of here. You can't talk about English literary devices and throw shade at Beowulf. Boo.
Okay.
By the
Yes.
way, that was a metaphorical statement. I was throwing shade, right? Not
I'm throwing
literally
shade.
true.
That's correct.
See, metaphors are just a part of and that's I'll just a quick aside here. And this is something that I think everyone should understand. We talk about these literary devices as if they're the province of poets and, English departments. And poets and English departments are certainly the ones who specialize and analyze and all those things. But literary devices are all they born out of language itself. Everyone uses literary devices all the time, whether you like it or not, whether you think about it or not. It's just a part of language. So, anyways,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, Tim, we teased the fact that at the end we're going to talk about why we should use literary devices. So we can save those comments for the end.
All right. You heard nothing.
No, although I mean, as much as people are here to listen to literary device discussion, which, I mean, somebody, if you, anyway, the point of having this podcast is hopefully that in the end, you understand more about literary devices. The idea that Tim and I will convince you to use literary devices at the end of this podcast is probably unlikely, but the education, even if you're listening to this as a software engineer, for example, like myself, these things are useful. And we'll talk about, that's what we're talking about at the end, is why they're useful and how they're useful. Yeah. Okay. Next. We're going to talk about meter. Tim, you were the one just talking about poetry. What is meter?
All right. So if you have a meal and you throw more barbecue chicken on it, then that meal is meater than it was before. So I had to stretch for that one.
Just so everyone knows, I did try to get other people on the podcast tonight.
He really did. He tries hard. Not his fault. Please don't blame him. Okay. Meter is the rhythm of the words in speech or in poetry. And so, for example, you can have different patterns, and it's the pattern between what we call the stressed and unstressed syllables. So if I say a word like syllable, there's an emphasis or a stress on a certain part of that word, and then a de-emphasis or an unstressed part on the other syllables. So syllable. The that first syllable, or the first syllable of syllable, is stressed. Anyways, so if I were to stack together a bunch of words where I stressed every third syllable, then I'd get a kind of a triplet meter: syllable, 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 syllable. Uh, Coventry syllable, wallaby, melting pot. I don't know, I'm just making up stuff, but you see how there's a kind of rhythm there. So you can have that kind of rhythm, a triplet rhythm. You can also have a two-beat rhythm. And a lot of Shakespeare stuff is actually written in that two-beat rhythm. And,
Known
and there's
as?
so the one that Shakespeare uses especially is iambic, pentameter. Iambic, which means I believe it's unstressed stressed.
I think
Right?
that's correct, yeah.
Okay, sorry, I'm a little rusty. Haven't taught meter in a long time. And then there's other ones where you can go stressed, unstressed. And then the triplet one that I talk about is more than the three. I think those are the principal three.
Right. I think, yeah. I mean, I'm sure you could stretch and get different types of meter, but those are I mean, you'd really have to be fighting hard to to fit language into a different meter outside of those.
Yeah. So limericks would be a good example. There once was a man from Nantucket. Da 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 da. You see those triplet beats there. That's that's an example of rhythm. A limerick just wouldn't be a limerick if you didn't have that rhythm to it. And anyways, so that's one of the foundational pieces of the difference between poetry and prose. Is often poetry will employ meter, whereas prose won't. A prose writer isn't necessarily paying attention to where the accents fall on the words. And if that sounds kind of archaic or whatever, you just need to look at modern songwriters as kind of the modern incarnation of most poetry. There's regular poets too, but as far as making money using poetic devices, songwriters would be the principal examples. But they've got to make the lyrics fit into the rhythm of the music, and music follows a pattern as well. You're going to have four beats, a 4-beat pattern or a 3-beat pattern, and anyways, so and there's something in us as humans that all of these literary devices are things like I said before, that spring out of humanity itself in our use of language. And meter is included in that. We just respond to rhythm. I was just teaching my students about prepositions today, and we used a song, and that's probably the best teaching that I can do for them for prepositions, because they're going to remember the song, and that will remind them of the words and what they mean. We just respond to rhythm. So anyways,
Yep.
and blurb.
It's a long blurb. I think I'd call it more article.
I'd probably call it a blurb.
Oh, my word. Okay. Along with meter, as Tim mentioned, rhyme obviously is something that everyone's familiar with. We're not going to spend time really discussing this much. Everyone knows what rhyme is.
No, sorry, must discuss, Carl. I'm sorry. Your thing about similes, which is just totally unfounded and irrational, is similar to my thing about rhyme, except that mine is very rational and well-founded.
I love rhyme, Tim. I love rhyme.
I love rhyme too when it's well employed. And maybe it's just because I taught high school and junior high English for so long that I just
it can be cheapened. That is fair. It can be really poorly done.
I compare it to cooking with salt, where it's of course a critical, a good chef knows how to cook with salt. But you give a 5-year-old salt and say make a souffle, and they just dump the salt in and it don't taste good. And that's just what a lot of people, I think, who attempt to write poetry, and it just grates so bad to just, please don't force that rhyme. I just, things like, using so as anyways, just, I'm sorry, forced rhymes and overly like rhyme that calls attention to itself. Anyways,
yeah. Right.
Good rhyme is beautiful and cool. But yeah,
right.
anyways, sorry.
Yeah. I mean, rhyme, like I said, rhyme is a two-edged sword. It can certainly do the job, but it can also backfire and kill the poet. I've done some basic, layman poetry writing. My dad authored a lot of poetry, published a lot of poetry, and I remember, this probably would be more than a decade ago now. I wrote a poem I was showing my dad, and he's generally very supportive. And he was of a lot of my, lame, but he saw one and he's like, son, please don't do that. Very like, you can't use that. It's so forced. It is so strained. Do not use that rhyme. He's like, if the rhyme beats the poet, then the poem is lost.
Here's a good just rule of thumb. If you ever use the phrase "you see" at the end of a line to make a rhyme, then you've crossed the line. And
right. Essentially,
unless your line is talking about how someone has been, had their eyes fixed, and now you see.
Right. If you're throwing in extra, like, if you're just essentially trying to force the rhyme, it should be very natural. It should flow with speech. It should build upon, the good writing, and it shouldn't. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be forced. So
here's a cool trick, just as a bit of homework for all of you who are going to go out inspired by our words and start writing your own poetry and poetic prose. Try enjambment. That's where your rhyme at the end of the line doesn't end the sentence or the phrase, but the phrase continues on to the next line. It's a bit trickier to do, but it can be cool when you pull it off. So
those are some of my favorite. Those are the ones my dad didn't disapprove of. He actually liked that a lot. So, I should link some of my dad's poetry. He could use anyway. He wrote in very traditional poetry forms, sonnets and things like that, all metered and rhymed. He was not a big fan of free verse, but yeah, for the sake of moving on from rhyme, because Tim just took us down a 5-minute rabbit hole.
Oh, quick, are we going to talk about free verse?
Heavens no, Tim, nobody wants to hear about that.
Just a quick, I'm sorry, you just bring up these things I have opinions on and I have to share. I actually like free verse. It's some of the best prose I've ever read.
I have heard free verse poetry read once where I actually liked it, one time. And Tim, you were there. This was in a university forum. And they had he was an Asian poet, I believe.
Oh, I remember that guy. Yes.
Yeah, and he read a lot of his poetry was free verse, but it was beautiful. I mean, it was truly well done, and that using all these other literary devices, just a very focused, very clear, clean, use of just lots of different literary techniques and just very beautiful. And that was up to that point. And since then, I don't think I've ever heard free verse where I was like, yeah, that's really good. I thought, that's too bad.
Well, and again, my comment is kind of snarky, but it's kind of what, for a lot of people, in a lot of cases, what free verse is. It's just prose writing that's just arranged into lines. And nothing wrong with that. Some great writing. It just,
Sure. Yeah, I still don't. I don't think there's an English professor out there that can convince me that those are not the same thing. Like free verse is not poetry; it's just prose, and it could be well written prose. Great, but like I said, that one time, and I don't know if it was sometimes metered, but like I said, I think it was mostly free verse. That poet read in that forum, that university forum, and I was mesmerized. I thought it was super well done.
Yeah. Should we define free verse real quick? Like, did
We
we?
should not. We already did. We said it's prose.
It's, there we go.
And we're
We'll
moving
say
on.
free verse is a poetry that has shed a lot of the. So poetry is by definition writing that constrains itself by various things, and especially use of many of these devices that we're talking about, like meter and alliteration, rhyme, and other stuff. And free verse kind of is poetry that doesn't use meter or rhyme or whatever, and so that's why we're a little snobbish about it.
Yeah, free verse is to poetry as really poorly done jazz music is to music.
And Carl, we should do a podcast episode on this sometime, because it's interesting. So you look at music, poetry, and artwork, like painting and stuff, and you see this same pattern happen throughout them all. In the Renaissance, you had this kind of peaking of form, right, and formalism. Right. And then afterwards, people start to experiment and kind of push against that, and you see over time those forms kind of fall away, and people breaking form in, whether it be impressionism in painting, or 12-tone modernism in music, or that's probably not the right phrase for it, but I don't know.
Yeah, there's a famous book about this, I think, by Achebe, Things Fall Apart.
Oh, things. That's right. If you're not familiar with that book, it's a book about things falling apart, and it's a downer book for sure.
It is a downer book.
but it is interesting to watch it and see how these different stepping away from form, even great artists stepping away from form to the point where it's hard to separate the art from just randomness or non-art. Anyways.
Right. Yeah. We could pontificate about that for a while, but we're not going to, because we're laymen and we don't pontificate at all.
That's right. We'll leave that to the popes.
Okay. Next one is hyperbole. Hyperbole is the worst literary device in the world.
Good job. Do you mean it, or were you just demonstrating?
No, I'm just demonstrating. I actually think hyperbole is great. Hyperbole is just super exaggerated statement or claim, and for literary effect of being overblown. Right, Tim?
Yes. Yeah. Well. To make a point, and it can be used like genuinely, or genuine is probably not the right word, but like a straight use of hyperbole would be, you're the best basketball player in the league, whether you're or not you're
right. Or I'm so hungry I could eat a horse.
There you go. The classic example. But of course, but it can also be employed to opposite effect with sarcasm.
Right.
Like, you're okay, quick, lay one on me, Carl. Your wit is sharper than a razor. No, that's a simile. Dang it. You're the smartest man on the planet, Tim. Exactly. Something like that. It's tone of voice. It's hard to figure that on paper, though, but there are ways.
Yeah. Hyperbole, something I think most people are familiar with. Like I said, a lot of these literary devices are, like you said, are things that we kind of see in our daily lives, even if we aren't necessarily writers, authors. Hyperbole is something that you see probably daily, multiple times a
Oh yeah.
day, where people just, it's fun to make exaggerated claims. It, keeps things spicy. So.
Yeah.
Okay, next, foreshadowing. And we'll talk about that in the future.
Ooh, yeah, that's right. Is it foreshadowing if it's like just overt, like we will talk about this in the future? He would die in chapter 13. Is that foreshadowing? I don't know.
I don't think so. Part of the fun of this podcast will really be the truly abysmal examples given. And like Tim is an eagle.
Yeah,
we'll
that's
talk
true.
about foreshadowing in the future.
Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, foreshadowing is generally a little bit more between the lines, a little bit more for the effect of indicating something might happen in the future, that there's something that you can. It's like the modern day tease of like, ooh, did they just say that if I use my phone to download the app, I can get free McDonald's? It's a really bad example as well, but
here I'll give one. So it can often be accomplished with symbols and symbolism. So for example, if a character is walking on the screen and a crow flies into the background and settles on the fence directly behind and above the character, then that could be a symbolic foreshadowing of crows being connected with death and or misfortune, and it could be a symbolic a foreshadowing of that character's impending doom or something like that.
We love impending doom.
We do. Anyone who loves literature, you got to have a taste for the dark and dreary. Love me some good Poe.
Yeah. So essentially, foreshadowing is a literary nod to this thing might have significance in the future, but without details or without explanation. So like Tim said, symbolically or even just the very loose definition, explanation. I don't know what I'm trying to say, Tim.
Yeah. Wow, he's scraping bottom here, Carl. No, and it's often what it can do is it can really build it, so it can increase engagement and kind of emotional connection when an audience gets to a certain point and says, aha, I see that's what
Right.
that reminds me of this, and you connect with it in a different way. It's another piece of that puzzle that clicks, and we love that. Again, a lot of what we're talking about here is about activating and intensifying the human experience. So you want to do that in your writing, and so foreshadowing is a way to do that, and you can really. If someone spots foreshadowing on the way in, then they're engaged because now they're watching to see, is this inkling that I have correct? And if they don't spot it until afterwards, and then or learn about it later, then it's oh, that's cool, I didn't even see that, or oh, now I see it.
Right.
Trying to think of it in movies. One thing, if you look up the M. Night Shyamalan talking about the Sixth Sense and the color red in that movie, And he
Right.
talks about how intentional they were with using the color red, and they used it oftentimes as a marker of something significant about to happen, or something to pay attention to. And that's not necessarily always foreshadowing, but I think they did, as I recall, it was that kind of thing to say, hey, watch this object or this person is important. That's a touch of foreshadowing there. I
Right.
believe that Hitchcock used that. I can't think of an example, but I just don't doubt it because of the way Hitchcock
Mm-hmm.
was. So go watch some old
Right.
Hitchcock movies. And Shyamalan actually would consider himself a student of Hitchcock, no
I
doubt.
was gonna say, I feel like there should be some explanation here of Rosebud, um, but I
Oh
can't make
yeah.
it. So, because I
Yeah.
haven't seen.
Oh really? Oh okay. Look, do you want me to explain
Well,
spoilers?
no, I have seen the movie, but I
Oh,
don't. It's been so long ago that I can't tie the ends together.
well, that's literally what Rosebud does in the movie. It's interesting. They actually brought that in late in the production. They had this just big long thing, and they said, we need something to tie this together. We need like a narrative thread to kind of make this a story, and that's what it is. So at the very beginning, you've got this scene. I can spoil this. So you're allowed to spoil a black and white movie.
I am
Sorry if
pretty
you haven't
sure that
seen
you're
it.
allowed to. Yeah.
That's on you. Yeah. But so yeah, at the beginning, you have a dying Citizen Kane.
This is Citizen Kane, by the way.
That's right. Often spoken of when talking about the greatest movie ever. And whether you agree with that assessment or not, it certainly was a highly influential movie. It pioneered a lot of new things, and yeah. Anyways, big deal. So yeah, at the very beginning, you've got this dying millionaire looking at this snow globe, and his last word he mutters is Rosebud, and then he drops the globe and it breaks, and this newspaper man is now trying to figure out what was Rosebud about. And so, which I think Carl's right to bring that up, because that could be that you've got just this big, blatant foreshadowing, or I mean, is it foreshadowing? I guess technically it is, because the whole movie now they're trying to figure this out, and at the very end we discover what Rosebud meant. And I will not spoil that for you, but it comes in the very final scene. And
Ironically, that's what I remembered. I didn't remember the beginning of the movie. I do remember the end. So,
oh yeah, and then
um,
yeah, you catch that at the end, you're like, oh dang! And again,
right.
that's what Adam does for you.
Yeah, to differentiate foreshadowing from just a very poorly done plot, if you've gone to a movie and been able to predict like what happens in the movie, that's not necessarily because of foreshadowing. It might just be hashed over plot lines that have been done a million times. Those are
Sure.
not the same thing. So
Yeah.
okay, moving on. Personification. You're giving human characteristics to a non-human thing, either an inanimate object or an animal or whatever else. So it's once again, that's something that we do very frequently in life. I mean, people do it with their pets all the time, but you can do it with any inanimate object. The clock stared me down. It's a pretty bad example, but
Not the worst in this podcast, though.
it's been yeah, I've significantly worse in the last few minutes.
But yeah,
Okay.
and again, this is something that comes out of human experience. We tend to do this. We'll see a human face in a cliff or a cloud. We will imbue humanity on other things. The intelligent eyes of a companion creature or whatever. And but keep in mind that there's lots of this personification actually pretty broad, because you have full-on anthropomorphization. I'm probably saying that wrong, but where you actually give think of I guess pick a Disney movie where the animals can talk, right? Yeah, that's
Right.
personification. But that's different from your example, Carl, where it's not literal. In your example, it is a comparative. It's a figurative
Right.
literary device. But when I make Bambi able to talk, it's not figurative, right? It's they're both personification. I guess that's what I'm getting at. There's figurative personification and non-figurative personification.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
Literal. Yeah.
Okay, for the sake of the audience who's probably mostly left us, I'm just going to hit 2 or 3 more, and then we're going to talk about why we use these and how they're useful in literature and in daily life. So last couple here, flashbacks. Once again, something that if you've ever read any book or seen any movie, you've seen a flashback, right? It's a transition in a story that goes back to an earlier time. So you have the main timeline, and then a jump back to some previous time that it generally gives explanation or fills out details about a character or a situation, and then it'll jump back to the main timeline. Now you can have movies that jump all over in timeline, but a simple flashback is just main timeline, jump back, give details or give plot points, and then come back to the main timeline.
And keep in mind that this is not like time travel jumping back in time.
Right.
This is the narration moves, goes to narrate a different point on the timeline, right? And
right.
It is fun to see stories and movies and books that will play with that, and you'll have time lines. I love the movie Frequency, where they're talking on the radio through time, and of course the great classic, the canonical work Back to the Future, actually takes us back in time.
Right. And then nowadays it's your Marvel Cinematic Universe where timelines all diverge and all kinds of craziness, and then it's never clear whether or not something's a flashback, because it's like, well, it could actually, they could just be taking us to a different timeline.
An alternate reality.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, the traditional flashback is just narrating, that we see. Well, actually, let's go back to Citizen Kane. We start at the end. He's dying, he dies, and then you flash back to when he's a kid, and Anyways.
Yeah. So those are flashbacks. Like I said, useful literary devices as far as getting details into a story, but being able to keep you on a particular timeline and then just fill in necessary pieces from a flashback. Okay, this one's actually my favorite, and you will judge me when you first hear it, but don't.
I'm getting ready. I've got my judging out.
Onomatopoeia.
You like just because it has P in it, don't you?
I like it because it has onomado. No, but I think I like it because it's spelled really weird.
Yeah,
that's onomatopoeia. No, the reason I like onomatopoeia, in the literary sense, take it or leave it. I mean, it absolutely serves an end and a purpose. So if I say take it or leave it, I mean it's just kind of one of the many literary devices. But the reason it's my favorite is because as a linguistics major, and for the layman even, that if you talk about words having meaning, most words are arbitrary. And the only exception, and by arbitrary I mean the word dog could be any word, right? Like any combination of sounds we could assign to that fluffy thing close to you, and it has as much significance.
Understanding with intelligent eyes and an understanding of what you're saying to it.
Right. DOG has no specific any real world connection to that animal. That's why in every different language you have, hond in Dutch, it's goal in Chinese, right? So,
and perro in Spanish.
Yeah, I mean, it's just those words all are completely different because they're arbitrary. They don't have any relation to the real world. That's the vast majority of words, right? Almost no words have a correlation to any real world thing, except onomatopoetic words. Onomatopoeia, bam, buzz, bang, the words that sound like the noise that they are mimicking, right? So buzz for a bee. So those are words that are not arbitrary, and that's why I enjoy them so much, is because they actually have real world significance. There aren't just, hey, we decided to give this sequence of words this meaning. I do appreciate encoding of like noise, using noise encoding to be able to convey meaning, which is what language is. But the idea that, oh, that sound, I'm going to use that in my language. Like that is an onomatopoeia, and it is fun.
Yeah, it's a cool point. Now, got to question you on this. There's like the word mom or mother has been noted to transcend language families.
Yeah, and that one is pretty simple, though. Actually, not onomatopoetic at all.
But just
that
because
one,
it's sort of the first words that a baby can, or sounds that a baby can make, is that
right? Exactly. It has entirely everything to do with the sounds that a baby can make. So when you're a baby, you know, the labial, you know, that that noise is very easy to make, and so that's why it gets associated with mothers, because mothers are around babies most. Dad, which like I said,
or papa or baba.
papa.
Yeah,
All of those super simple. Those are having to do with mother and father, because those are the caretakers, the caregivers for the children. So you'll see those on occasion, but those aren't onomatopoetic. The onomatopoetic has to do with the actual
the sound of the
thing. Bang, bam, thump. And those can change from language to language. Not in every language. You don't necessarily have the same onomatopoetic words, but you do have certain sounds, certain noises that do find their way into all languages, right? And so, you know, I don't know buzz in Chinese, but you know, and it doesn't. That word doesn't actually necessarily onomatopoetic in Chinese, but they will have onomatopoeia in Chinese as well, where certain words are derived from the sound in the real world. So.
And Carl, incidentally, thank you for explaining to me why "hey" is not a name for mother in any language.
Hey, hey.
Yeah, I don't know. I was trying to think of what would be the hardest sounds to make.
Like clicking noises.
That's right. We'll have to do a podcast on the rarest sounds in human language. That'd be cool.
That would be fun.
Sound people.
We could do some. I mean, I took a fair amount of phonetics classes in college. Okay. Oxymoron.
Okay.
No, I was not. I wasn't. Oh, I was not calling Tim that.
Well, there you go. I was gonna quote one of my favorite movies, Oscar. Which brilliant. You should go see it. It's
and a moron.
Yes, Sylvester Stallone does a brilliant job playing this mafia boss, and then Tim Curry is wonderful as this linguistics professor of elocution. And at one point he talks about, oh, that's an oxymoron, and of course all the mafia thugs are just befuddled. And later, Sylvester Stallone comes out and says, Connie, Dr. Pooh was right. You are an ox and a moron. Sorry, you had to be there, but you should go watch it, and then you'll be able to appreciate it like us.
Yeah. So an oxymoron is two opposite things coexisting, essentially, in the same phrase or whatever. And so it is. I'm trying. Give me an example of there deafening silence.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. I like that. That's a better example than all the traditional ones, like
Well, I read it off the
on,
thing that over
on
here.
the intelligence
Are
or
you saying
jump
it's better than Tim is an eagle?
him as an eagle. No, nothing beats that. You're trying to come up with an oxymoron on the spot. Dang it.
That it's hard, guys. Just so you know, if you go back like 20 minutes ago when I was just fumbling for words, which was very, I'll probably just leave it in because it's very layman of me. It's really hard to come up with some of these on the spot, and you'd say, well, why didn't you do your research and add them beforehand? And I'd say, did you pay me?
Yeah,
And then
that's
we'd be
right.
done with. Okay, last literary device, and then we'll talk about why we use them. Irony. Um, Irony, to me, I was actually reading about irony today because I was trying to differentiate between sarcasm and irony. And sarcasm is a tool of irony, but irony is more broad. Um, Tim, how would you define irony?
Okay, yeah, it's tricky. And when we teach it in English, you talk about dramatic irony and oh
Right.
shoot, I just forgot the other categories. But yeah, so the idea though is some oppositional or contrasting, some contrast between what is expected or what is maybe should be happening and what actually happens or what is expected. And yeah, it can play out in a lot of ways. Sarcasm, a great everyday example of irony where there is a contrast or an opposition between what is said and what is meant, right? If I say, good job, Sherlock, I am saying in words something that suggests intelligence and the ability to deduce, right? Actually a metaphor comparing someone to Sherlock, but my tone and the context make it clear that I'm actually insulting your intelligence, and so it has that opposite. So this can be done with sarcasm, but there are different kinds of irony that also do not employ sarcasm. So you can have so I'll talk about dramatic irony in a second, but so we'll go to say
I have the other, while you're thinking, the other, I mean, apparently there's a bunch of different types of irony, but the three, you know, basic types of irony: verbal irony, situational irony, and dramatic irony.
okay,
And
and verbal
irony, by
irony
the
would be
way,
the sarcasm
right.
that
Yep.
yeah,
Situational irony is when the opposite of what expected happens. And then dramatic irony is when the audience knows something that the characters do not.
there you go. So you can imagine, dramatic irony, the killer is creeping up on the victim. We see the killer coming, the victim does not. Dramatic irony, that would be an example. Situational irony would be all those things like, maybe so, okay, I'm going to go there. Alanis Morissette's song, Ironic, right? So let's talk about the first part.
Rain on your
There you go.
wedding day.
And many people have pointed this out and say that is not ironic. That's just unfortunate, right? Having rain on your wedding day. But we can make it ironic. Let's say that you were engaged to a meteorologist, and the meteorologist specifically, you guys chose that day so that you could avoid rain and have a sunny wedding, and then it rains. That would be situational irony now.
Oh, I have the best situational irony ever. Okay, so this happened. I may have even actually talked about it in the podcast in the past, but it's certainly worth talking about again one more time. My son graduated from middle school a couple of years ago, and it was like this awards banquet type thing, and the principal saves this award for the last, and he starts talking. It's the attendance awards, perfect attendance for all 3 years in middle school.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I mean, just crazy, right? Like, and so he talks about how amazing this award is, and how this is, in some future day, an employer will be so grateful for the student that this is just such a sign of dedication and professionalism. and then he announces the name for the boy to come forward. He's not there.
Where was he?
I mean, he just didn't come.
Oh, really?
He didn't come.
He was gone.
It was so wonderful. I mean, everyone thought it was the best part of the whole night. So
that's awesome. Yeah, there you go. Situational irony.
Yeah.
But and this gets used a lot in movies and drama books.
I like being dramatic.
Yes, it's used a lot in comedy, of course, for the obvious reason that it's often funny,
Right.
but it's not always. You can have tragic irony.
Tragic irony. Yeah.
Yeah, and shoot darn if I can't think of an example. It's making me mad. Anyways, I'll think of something right after you finish the podcast. And
I mean, essentially,
really
I mean, you can think about like I, Robot or something like that. One of these Will Smith movies where the person that creates the robot is killed by the robot.
Oh, okay.
But that's kind of tragic
yeah, or
ironies.
you specifically, you create the robots to provide security, and then they end up being a threat.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yep.
There we go.
Okay. Now, Tim, there are other literary things that we did not discuss. Literary devices that we there are a whole another list we could talk about for a next podcast. And don't tempt us because we will.
Yeah, that's right. We go to tempt.
But literary devices, you've already talked about, the fact that we see these in our daily lives, but the core reason of why we would want to use these, why we should employ these, is what?
Okay, so I would say to embrace and experience the joy of being a human. When your language and the way you communicate is one of the things that defines you and defines your experience in this life. And we most of the time, honestly, most of our communication and stuff is pretty ho-hum. We're just, what time is your doctor's appointment? There's no poetry there. There's no zest for life, right? But every day you're telling stories and you're expressing yourself, your feelings and stuff. If you, I'm not saying you have to make a study of these things, but if you pay attention to them and use them in your own communication, and I can speak from personal experience, it adds color, it adds interest, and it spices up your world. Your story that you're telling in the afternoon about what happened at work is going to have more interest if you employ some of these devices. And you will feel different too. I feel good when I am expressing myself with creativity, when I'm finding a new way to phrase something, when I'm being a little artful about my words. So yeah, I'm not saying do it all the time, but yeah, maybe pause for a moment the next time you're writing an email to a friend or a text, or the next time you're telling a story, and take a moment to come up with just a fun off the wall metaphor and throw it out there. And if it hits it right on the nose, then great, you've communicated an idea and had impact. And the fun thing is, if it misses,
like Tim is an eagle.
Oh yeah, exactly. And there's a great example. If it misses, then all the better. It'll get a laugh in a different way and be just as memorable, and or maybe even more so. So yeah, have some fun with it. Play with your language. That's we were born to use language, and so lean into that. And it doesn't matter whether you're an English snob like us or not. That's it. Everyone,
like we.
Language is for everyone.
Like we, Tim.
Like we. Shut your face.
Okay. Yes. Let me just a second what you're saying. So there is like literally
Like,
besides the altruistic, like, oh, it makes language prettier, there is like self-serving reason. There are self-serving reasons to use literary devices, independent of like I'm trying to write a book to get it published. It draws people in, like Tim was indicating. So essentially, if you want to be more interesting, if you want people to care about what you say, it honestly it has this you know subconscious ability to connect with people and to make the things that you're saying more interesting. And so if you
set
can,
yourself apart, right?
right, exactly, yeah, suddenly the stories that you're telling and the way that you're telling them, and the just the flair that you have with your verbal or written communication is noticeable even to people that don't like consciously notice it. And so it will draw people into. You're going to become more powerfully. Your rhetoric is going to be more powerful. Your friendships are going to be, just I wouldn't say more meaningful, but they're going to be more. It's going to be easier to find friendships, and they probably will be more spicy. Um,
Set yourself apart from the unwashed masses who write and speak in dreary, gray, ashen monotone. How was that?
how beautiful, beautiful, Tim,
Oh,
beautiful.
see, look, I made a friend right there. Okay.
I do say, if you've done a lot of reading or if you haven't, I recommend going and reading. There are wonderful, amazing authors alive today, and so there are wonderful examples of this. But if you go back, to some of the classics or writing done in the let's call it early 19th century, mid 19th century, it was just far more common to use very flowery prose, even among the laymen. And so you'll see a lot of it there. And while it absolutely still exists in your literary authors of today, the layman kind of has weeded a lot of this stuff out, and language becomes very transactional, which I think is unfortunate because it is the way that we kind of experience life as a community, as a society. And so if we
Hear
can
that
create,
metaphor weeded out? See? Huh?
yeah, if we can create a very thriving linguistic ecosystem, I think it does help our social bonds and our mental capacity for finding empathy and finding meaning. And so I think it's useful to say that even if you don't have any aspirations to write a book, that you can actually find reasons to use literary devices in your speech and in your writing, whatever it might be. And hopefully that wasn't too, soapboxy. But
Yeah. Oh, and what a way to end with another metaphor there. Turn them out like candy. Simile, gotcha.
I hate similes. All right. On that note, we'll sign off. Thank you for listening. For the 5 of you that are listening to the end, Mom, okay. We'll be back at next podcast, and join us then. Thanks.